Good evening. I am Janie Buckland with the West Virginia FEW, Families United for Education. And I wanted to come on and give a brief rundown, a summary, if you will, of the hearing earlier today there at the Supreme Court of West Virginia and give you some thoughts on that and just some next steps. What is next? So, starting out with the summary of the hearing. Lindsay C., I think is how you pronounce her last name, Solicitor General, there to represent the state of West Virginia for the Attorney General's office. Focused, by the way, did a fantastic job. She was wonderful, polished. I was very impressed with Lindsay's performance there today, her contribution. She focused on the arguments that there isn't anything preventing the state from providing alternatives in addition to public school, and which I think is a super compelling argument. But who am I, right? Just a homeschool mom from Southern West Virginia. But in terms that this isn't violating the Constitution, the state will still be able to use the same formula funding that is in place. It is not compromised in any way, so they'll still be able to use that. But this would provide another option for families pertaining to education, but it doesn't necessarily directly keep the state from supporting families with that free and public education, right? That's their duty. They have a duty. The state has a duty. That's kind of the whole argument. They have a duty to make sure that they are providing that thorough and efficient education. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Are they really doing that for every family? I'm not sure. But they do have that duty to fund the public schools. But because this is a separate funding formula, this is not compromising the funding formula that is in place. Her argument was that it is not contradicting the Constitution. She was saying that the Constitution isn't limiting the legislature from offering some type of improvement to the education landscape, if you will. So, and I'm going to come back to that in a second as I talk about the opposition's argument. What we heard from Lindsay was that, we're not limiting here. And gave some statistics, which I thought was helpful. She talked about the, multi-billion-dollar budget for public education, and that if we look at that $120 million for Hope, we're talking about 3% of that. Josh House from IJ representing Katie Switzer and Jennifer Compton from West Virginia. These are parents that whose children are being impacted by this injunction and this unconstitutional ruling. And so he was there to speak on their behalf. And again, he talked about that this doesn't violate, their argument is that it doesn't violate the Constitution. And then brought up the fact that the opposition is saying that it frustrates the Constitution, right? Like there's some type of friction there, but was just able to show that there are families being impacted by this ruling. And I think when you look at K-12 education in West Virginia, we really do have to start considering is what we are doing enough? Is what the state currently providing, is that enough to meet the youth of West Virginia, their educational needs? So next up first up for the opposition, Tamerlan Goley from a firm out of California. They're representing Wendy Peters and Travis Beaver. And she talked about this being a voucher, that parents get a voucher, which has been a frustrating thing for me this entire time to listen to, especially in the media, journalists calling this a voucher program. It's kind of like it's foundational that ESAs are a different structure. So with a voucher, you have, it's almost like a coupon, right? So you have this voucher is attached to the student and can only be used by this participating bundled school option, right? This private school can receive this. It just shows how disconnected they really are from the families of West Virginia, because the families that we serve with the few, there is a small portion of families who would like to use their Hope Scholarship funds for private schools, but we're in a state with just under 150 private schools. There are 12 counties out of West Virginia, out of the 55, who don't even have a private school, right? And so it's kind of disconnected to say that this is just a voucher program that's only going to be able to go from here to there. What we see Hope actually being is the vehicle that provides the resources that we need in West Virginia to be able to launch learning programs like what my family has been a part of now for 15 years in Southern West Virginia, planting these co-ops and learning pods and similar, micro school learning environments. We see Hope being a vehicle for that to actually activate supply and innovation and communities, rural communities, launching private schools. So there's a bit of a disconnect to call it a voucher program and say that families are just going to use it and just go to a private school. That's actually not what we're seeing. When we were working with families through the application process and the beginning of that implementation, we were actually seeing that they were very interested in what homeschoolers have been doing for years, this unbundling, right, of education, where this is the best math provider or math curriculum, and this is the best ELA program for my child, and we're going to go here for this piece and here for this piece. Hope really does disrupt the status quo in that we're looking at parents and saying, we actually do believe that you're in the best position to make this decision for your child. And we definitely heard from the opposition today that they do not believe that that is what should be happening. So not a voucher, but an education savings account. That being said, there is still accountability, which, we heard this pretty heavily in that lower circuit court hearing where the injunction was given by Tabbitt. It was pandemonium, no accountability, just making it rain. You get $1, you get $1 for parents, which is not at all what it is. And so the fact that it's being portrayed and represented that way, it's kind of hard to sit with that. But in actuality, there are assessment pieces to the Hope Scholarship program, and I think a lot of opposition has missed that fact. But every student who is receiving the Hope Scholarship is obligated to have an assessment at the end of the year through a standardized test that satisfies the criteria of the state, or through a portfolio review that must be reviewed by a certified teacher, right? And that's what the state is saying. Certified teachers are that qualified person, individual, and that is who would be reviewing that portfolio review. And that's getting submitted to the county and then submitted to the State Department of Education, which was another argument that they said that we've completely removed the Board of Education from this. But in actuality, we're submitting those assessments to the Department of Education at the end of the year. And so if there are concerns that there is educational neglect, there is a pathway for accountability for the students who are using Hope Scholarship. And so she also focused on the limitation, that the Constitution has limited, it has restrained what the legislature, if you will, could do, what they can or can't do. And I just think that that's so unique. And I want to talk a little bit about that, how we saw Lindsay talk about they're not limited. And now we see Ms. Goley talk about the limitations and the restraints. As a taxpayer, as a mother who born and raised in West Virginia, it's interesting to hear someone, from California talk about how we should be limited and restrained. So we are expected to help fund this, right? Our property taxes are funding the public school system, our income tax, both state and at a federal level, portions of that all used to fund public education. That is supposed to be limited and is supposed to be restrained. I want to believe that we live in a state. She also talked about like 150 years. This has been the way things have been done. I want to live in a state where they recognize that there's potential for us to do something different, especially when we look at where West Virginia ranks when it comes to education. She had a concern about fly-by-night pop-up schools, which, you know, that's kind of my wheelhouse. Like, we're working with providers throughout the state to make sure that they're not a fly-by-night pop-up. We're working to make sure that they understand how to run programs that are compliant at the local, state, and federal level, working with families to make sure they understand compulsory education and exemptions from compulsory education, which Hope Scholarship is an exemption. That's its very basis. And so I want to just speak to that we are, when you're launching programs and families have the money to use with those programs, there's some buy-in there, right? If families aren't happy, these fly-by-night providers aren't going to stick around. They have true accountability that's built in the market, right? Because I'll take my dollars elsewhere if you're not educating my child. Can't do that with public school. So it is built in there. And then we had, focused on the thorough and efficient, for public schools, which is the funding, which is, in the Constitution. But again, 1,500 teacher shortage, are they providing that? And how hard should it be for the families of West Virginia if it's not meeting our needs, if the public school system is not meeting our needs? And then lastly, Michael Taylor, local there from Charleston, West Virginia, representing David Roach, Superintendent Paul Hardesty, President of the Board of Education. If you'll remember, we've had a shakeup here in West Virginia when it comes to the roles there. So David Roach is now in the position that Clayton Birch was in. Paul Hardesty now in the position that Miller Hall, my former high school principal, that he was in. And so Michael representing them. Really the takeaway from Michael's argument was that our kids should be in public school. And we have a duty to only support public school. And that if the state says another option could be a quality option, they are failing by showing an investment in another option. That doesn't sit well with me either. As a parent, I didn't have children so that they are a direct funding source for public education. So we give Ryan at the Gazette a hard time about using the word or talking about diverting funds. I didn't have children just to fund public education, right? And so and the fact that my children have always been homeschooled, that $4,600 has never been going to the public school. They've still been getting local funding. They've still been getting federal funding because of the census, but they've not been getting that state portion. And so that's not been going to the school. And this way it would actually just benefit the child. It would actually follow the child and allow the parents to demonstrate that they have they're a stakeholder, the families are a stakeholder. And so what we heard from him is that you can't possibly, if you're running a business, you don't direct traffic to another business. But if you're offering a service that is not meeting the need of the consumer, then are we saying that we can't possibly in this state look at our other consumers and offer them the potential to fund their child's education somewhere else other than the public schools? So that's kind of a summary of what we had as far as the arguments are concerned. So moving forward from that, to the parents that have been on this journey now with us for over a year, right? As we were watching everything going up and down, you're asking, so what's next? What could possibly happen after this point? And so the justices are going to make a decision, right? They're going to make a ruling and that will be posted. My understanding is like on their website, that will be posted. So as soon as we know, of course, we'll communicate that. Expecting to hear by Thanksgiving But there were some murmurs today that maybe sooner than that. That would be wonderful. For parents and providers, what does that look like then? The Hope Board would be the authoritative body, if you will, right? That's been delegated to them in the treasurer's office or by the treasurer's office as the agency. And so the Hope Board would then come together and figure out, okay, what does it look like from here as far as getting families money and qualifying providers. So it's a little unsatisfying at that point because we're just sticking a pin in it until we know more. I do want to just say to the parents and the providers, like, we're fighting for this, right? You know how hard life is in West Virginia. I mean, it's just our reality. We're fighting for this. And we are committed to making sure that we at the Few are committed to making sure that you have representation. And our work is part of the coalition, the larger Coalition for Hope Scholarship. But it's not just this. We also want to serve families who are navigating public school. We recognize that public school is a necessity in the state. We want to see strong public schools. And we don't believe that the Hope Scholarship is going to be the defunding of public education. We actually believe that it's going to help serve the families and the children whose needs aren't being met by the public school. So stick with us. I know this is not ideal, and I just want to acknowledge that I see you and I hear you, and I know how frustrating this is. Just know that you might not see all the inner workings on what's going on, but we're fighting for you. And then to national partners and friends that are kind of following along on what's going on in West Virginia, thank you. It's encouraging to know that others are rooting for us, kind of these underdogs in this game. Our goal here, my goal, is to transform K-12 education in the Mountain State. That's what I want to see happen. Like, for the Few, and 10 years from now, I want to see a Jamie Buckland in every single county speaking to stakeholders, lawmakers, and communicating on behalf of families and parents to communicate our interests. It's hard to sit there and listen to the opposition just advocate just for public school, and knowing all of the families who could be so well served by this. I want to end with this. There was an argument made that this is actually going to silo, I think is what they said, the special needs community, or the children, in poverty. There are families in poor communities who we worked with late at night getting their applications in. There are grandchildren being raised by grandparents because their parents lost their battle with addiction. There are children that you may think, the opposition may think, are being isolated and that won't be served by something like this. Again, it just shows a disconnect, because I met with those families. I worked with those families, and I listened to their disappointment and frustration when this injunction was granted. And those families, those grandparents, we have a family here that's close to me that had just adopted 4 children out of foster care. And this was going to provide them the resources to give those children a stable environment this year and some space to heal from the trauma and the roller coaster that they have been on at no fault of their own. So it's hard to hear that argument knowing that that's not the reality, and that there are children who would benefit from this that are in situations that are not ideal. This is not just benefiting affluent families. This will benefit children who need another option and whose needs are not being met within the public school. Lastly, the argument by the opposition, a lot of it is that the special needs community will no longer be able to have funding to have their needs met within the public school, but this doesn't touch federal funding. And so if you have an IEP and that money coming in, this isn't touching that. This isn't disrupting that. That's still going to be provided for. So that's all that I've got. I went a little longer than I had planned to, but I hope this is helpful. Stay tuned, and we'll definitely let you know any developments as they come up. So again, Jamie Buckland with the West Virginia FEW, Families United for Education. If you have any questions, do feel free to reach out. You guys have a great night.